Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a pretty wild story: how a simple online bookstore completely transformed into the invisible infrastructure of our modern lives. It's an unbelievable tale of rapid innovation, ruthless ambition, and just unimaginable scale. We're going to examine the deep roots of this empire and the massive footprint it leaves on our economy today.
Okay, before we really get into it, let's look at this quote from a high school-aged Jeff Bezos. "The Earth is finite, and if the world economy and population is to keep expanding, space is the only way to go." It perfectly captures his relentless, almost Napoleonic ambition, right? He wasn't just thinking about a successful little business, he was visualizing manufactured worlds rotating in space to create artificial gravity holding millions of people. It's exactly this kind of scale, thinking totally unbound by normal limits, that drove the creation of Amazon.
So here's our roadmap for This Explainer. First, we'll look at the relentless blueprint, then the everything gatekeeper, the human cost, the invisible infrastructure, and finally, the monopoly reckoning. Let's get started. All right, part one, the relentless blueprint, from Wall Street data to the everything store. Picture this. It's the 1990s, and Jeff Bezos leaves a secretive Wall Street hedge fund because he spotted a completely mind-blowing stat. The internet was growing at 2,300% a year, literally exploding. He picked books to sell simply because the massive volume of titles allowed him to build a store online that physically couldn't exist in the real world. And here's the genius part. He convinced his investors to accept zero profits for decades, choosing instead to aggressively take market share and build an unbeatable infrastructure. Now, Amazon operates on this really fascinating duality. On one hand, they demand what they actually call customer ecstasy, always putting you, the buyer, first. On the other hand, they use absolutely ruthless tactics behind the scenes. Insiders literally called their negotiation strategy the Gazelle Project, meaning they would approach vulnerable book publishers the exact same way a cheetah pursues a sickly gazelle to demand better terms. Amazon executives, though, they note that this is just standard retail behavior, fighting for tight margins to ultimately pass those savings on to the consumer. Moving right along to part two, the everything gatekeeper controlling the marketplace. Just look at this number, 40%. That is Amazon's staggering share of all online commerce in the United States today. To reach this colossal scale, Bezos realized pretty quickly he couldn't just sell his own inventory. He had to pivot. He effectively became the landlord of the internet's main street, allowing anyone and everyone to set up shop right on his platform. So how'd they get there? Amazon used a brilliant but definitely controversial playbook. First, they invited independent businesses to set up shop, which vastly expanded their inventory. But third-party sellers quickly realized there was a catch. Critics argue that Amazon tracks exactly which products are succeeding and then frequently creates its own branded, much cheaper versions to compete directly against those very same sellers. Amazon strongly pushes back on this framing, of course. They argue they're just a normal retailer competing globally, and that they proactively provide tools to support their third-party partners. Okay, let's look at part three, the human cost and the reality of Prime delivery. 150 million. Think about that for a second. That is how many Prime members expect lightning-fast delivery today. When Prime first introduced free 2-day shipping back in 2005, it was a massive gamble. Almost overnight, giant fulfillment warehouses sprang up across the country, especially in areas hard hit by the Great Recession, providing hundreds of thousands of much-needed jobs just to keep this physical machine running. But if you look inside those massive warehouses, you're going to hear about two vastly different realities. Some workers report grueling robotic scan rates, claiming that handheld scanners force them to cheat safety rules just to avoid being fired for missing their quotas. Meanwhile, Amazon leadership points to a completely different picture. They highlight that they offer double the minimum wage, excellent healthcare benefits, and heavy investments in specialized robotics designed specifically to keep their workers safe. And to get all those packages through the last mile to your door, Amazon did something interesting. They didn't hire a massive fleet of direct employees. Instead, they built a huge network of third-party contractors driving vans that are just small enough to bypass federal trucking regulations. Investigative reporters have linked the intense pressure for speed in this network to dozens of serious crashes. Amazon fiercely disputes these reports, stating any accident is one too many, and they defend their comprehensive insurance and strict safety expectations for all independent contractors. Then, of course, you have the wild west of the marketplace itself. When a flood of dangerous items from overseas, like toxic school supplies or those hoverboards that kept catching on fire, hit the platform, consumer advocates demanded Amazon take legal responsibility.
Amazon, however, views itself merely as the technology provider connecting buyers to third parties in these cases. Still, they emphasize they've recently poured over $400 million into advanced systems to proactively weed out unsafe products before they ever reach your door.
This brings us to part 4, the invisible infrastructure, from retailer to tech behemoth.
You know, it's really easy to miss the boiling frog effect of Amazon's expansion into our daily lives. Just look at this timeline. They moved seamlessly from launching fast shipping in 2005 to securing massive military cloud contracts to literally putting listening devices directly into our living rooms. They had built such an incredible computing infrastructure just to keep their own store online that they decided to rent out the excess capacity, which completely changed the trajectory of the entire tech industry. $35 billion in a single year. That's AWS, or Amazon Web Services, quietly running a massive chunk of the modern internet. The crucial turning point came in 2013 with a $600 million contract to host data for the CIA. Once the intelligence community trusted Amazon with its highly classified data, well, the rest of the corporate world knew they could too. Today, AWS powers everything from Netflix to Uber. But Amazon isn't just in our browsers anymore, right? They're extending their digital reach deep into our physical lives. Bezos' sci-fi visions came to life with Alexa, which gathers incredibly valuable data right from our kitchens and living rooms. They also purchased Ring, effectively creating a privatized neighborhood watch system that partners with hundreds of local police departments. And simultaneously, their facial recognition software, Rekognition, has been aggressively marketed to law enforcement agencies. And naturally, this creates a really profound societal tension. On one side, you have undeniable life-saving conveniences, like using Ring cameras to solve crimes or find missing children. But on the other, privacy advocates warn we are sleepwalking right into a surveillance dystopia, citing potential hacks and a total lack of federal regulation around AI and policing. Amazon counters that these technologies do tremendous societal good and that they provide users with robust opt-out features to protect their privacy. Which leads us to our final section, Part 5, the Monopoly Reckoning. Has Amazon won capitalism? So, for decades, regulators pretty much only cared if a company raised prices. And since Amazon is laser-focused on artificially low prices and extreme convenience, they've successfully sidestepped antitrust action for a long time. But today, the philosophy in Washington is shifting. Lawmakers are increasingly questioning the paradox of their power. They're asking if Amazon's unique role as both the marketplace owner and a fierce competitor in that very marketplace gives them an insurmountable advantage that ultimately suffocates all future innovation. The pushback is now coming from all sides. Take their HQ2 search, for example. Cities practically begged Amazon to bring them 50,000 jobs, engaging in this massive public bidding war. But the moment Amazon selected New York and Virginia, a huge public backlash erupted over the billions in corporate tax handouts being given to one of the richest companies on Earth. This localized anger, combined with bipartisan antitrust investigations in D.C., marks a very distinct shift in how the public views the tech giant. What's really striking is that even Amazon's very first employee, a guy named Shel Capahan, has expressed deep concern over the empire he helped build. He admits he's frightened by what his corporate offspring has become. Capahan notes that the company is honestly just doing what business schools teach, expanding aggressively and finding every possible efficiency. But he suggests that at this unprecedented scale, heavy regulation or even breaking them up might be necessary for a healthy society. Ultimately, we're looking at two very different faces of Amazon here, a miraculous engine of low prices and innovation, and a dominant force accused of squeezing workers, crushing competitors, and wielding outsized influence over our democracy. They undoubtedly changed the way we consume content, receive goods, and utilize the cloud. But that very success has birthed an entity so tightly woven into the fabric of daily existence that avoiding it feels nearly impossible. So as you think about this massive, invisible infrastructure quietly powering your daily life, consider this. Are we okay with one company essentially winning capitalism? Think about that the next time a package arrives at your door. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.